The gates of the Cole mansion had never been so besieged. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras captured every movement. Elizabeth, the widow, stood firm, her face pale, her gaze lost. She knew that behind those gilded walls lay buried secrets that could destroy more than her late husband's impeccable image. It was a silent inheritance war. Wall Street tycoon Richard Cole left behind more than just material wealth. He also left behind a tangle of contracts, shady partnerships and fragile alliances. His estimated $600 million fortune seemed solid, but the reality hid cracks. In the safe, instead of treasure, the sealed letter pointed to a legacy of betrayal and conspiracy. Daniel Harper, the family's lawyer, was the first to receive a copy of the will. With a calculating eye, he noticed its unusual clauses. Among them, a vague reference to a special reserve that had never been declared. Harper said nothing to the press, but within him the certainty grew. There was a hidden fortune, a key that would change the Coles' entire destiny. Meanwhile, Sophia, the eldest daughter, was preparing her attack. Always ambitious, she saw her father's passing as an opportunity to consolidate her own empire. However, when she learned of the mysterious letter, something inside her exploded in fury. "He couldn't possibly have kept this from me," she muttered, staring at Richard's gilded portrait in the main room. The mansion's hall reeked of fresh flowers, mingled with the scent of candles burning in mourning. Elizabeth, as she walked among the guests who had come to offer their condolences, maintained the posture of a grieving widow. But deep down, her heart was beating rapidly. She knew the hidden fortune wasn't just money. It was proof of secrets capable of damning. That same night, a journalist managed to infiltrate the wake and whispered to Elizabeth, "They say Richard kept more than just numbers. He kept dangerous confessions." The widow paled. The man disappeared before he could be identified. The comment echoed in her mind like an invisible knife. Richard's secrets could be fatal for everyone. Outside, cameras captured footage of Jonathan Miller, Richard's partner, arriving in a luxurious black car. Jonathan smiled at the reporters, but his look spoke volumes. Fear. He knew of hidden clauses and illegal contracts that had sustained part of the empire. If that letter were to come to light, his very freedom would be at risk. A murmur of possible betrayal began to circulate among those present. Some whispered that Richard had maintained secret affairs. Others spoke of dirty dealings with Washington politicians. Elizabeth listened silently, knowing that any wrong word could light the fuse. It was like walking on crystal. Any slip-up would reveal the truth. In his office, Harper pored over previously catalogued documents. The yellowed paper of the letter contrasted with modern investment folders. The words in black ink were few but forceful. "He who finds this key will find what was hidden." There were no signatures, but the style was unmistakable. Richard liked to write riddles. Sophia burst into the office, staring coldly at Harper. "I want to know what my father left me. Don't hide anything from me," she said firmly. The lawyer, accustomed to this kind of pressure, smiled cynically. "All in good time, miss. The law demands patience." But deep down, he knew, this inheritance war would end in bloodshed and betrayal. As the night wore on, Elizabeth locked herself alone in her room. The weight of the letter burned in her hands. Her heart told her to destroy it before it was too late, but her mind remembered Richard's words. "The future of our family depends on this secret." The widow wept silently, knowing that her grief was only the surface of something much greater. The wake ended, but the mansion knew no rest. As the guests departed, whispers echoed through the gilded halls. Elizabeth, alone before the fireplace, clutched the letter as if it were a cursed object. The flames reflected in her tear-filled eyes, reminding her that secrets could not be erased as easily as burned paper. Jonathan, now settled into one of the plush sofas, sipped whiskey with trembling hands. He remembered clandestine meetings with Richard, nights when millions of dollars were quietly transferred to offshore accounts. This hidden fortune was not only the fruit of hard work, but also of shady alliances that, if revealed, could bring down entire empires. The next morning, the headlines were even harsher. Mystery in coal inheritance, secret letter could change fate of fortune. Journalists crowded outside the mansion, turning the morning into a spectacle. Elizabeth, watching from the window, felt trapped. The inheritance war was no longer a private conflict, but a public trial fueled by collective greed. Sophia, irritated by her mother's silence, burst into the room. "What are you hiding from me?" she shouted, her eyes burning with rage. Elizabeth tried to remain calm, but her voice cracked. "Not everything your father left was gold, my daughter." Sophia, having no patience for enigmas, took this as a confession. There, an irreparable rift was born between mother and daughter. Meanwhile, Harper discreetly gathered documents in his office. He knew he was playing both sides. His family depended on his loyalty, but the letter's secrecy guaranteed him power. His mind was calculating possibilities: maintain the mystery and negotiate advantages, or reveal part of the truth and protect himself. Either way, betrayal was already coursing through his veins. Jonathan received a cryptic call. On the other end, a husky voice said, "If this card comes up, you lose everything. Remember, Richard was no saint." Jonathan hung up, but sweat beaded on his forehead. He knew the secret wasn't locked away within the mansion alone. Other players, hidden on the board, were waiting for their chance to claim pieces of the fortune. At night, Elizabeth walked the halls, hearing the echoes of Richard's footsteps as if he was still alive. His portrait on the wall seemed to watch her, judging her every choice. "You left me with an impossible burden," she murmured. The letter, tucked away in her drawer, pulsed as if alive. It was more than a will. It was a disguised confession. Suspicious, Sophia began spying on her own mother. She discreetly followed her movements, listened to phone calls, and even rummaged through drawers. In one of the cabinets, she found an antique key wrapped in cloth. Holding it, she felt the power of the enigma. Perhaps it wasn't just a symbol. Perhaps it was the literal key to the hidden fortune everyone was afraid to mention. Meanwhile, the media explored every detail of the Coles' lives. Late-night shows discussed potential lovers, dirty dealings, and secret accounts. The image of an exemplary family was crumbling before the cameras. Elizabeth knew she would soon have not only reporters at her door, but also federal investigators. The fortune Richard had built could be turned into a gilded prison. Attorney Harper summoned Elizabeth and Sophia to a formal meeting. He placed the will on the marble table, but set the letter aside as if it didn't exist. "The fortune will be divided, but there are attachments under review," he said calmly. Sophia exploded. "Stop stalling me! I know there are secrets in that safe, and I will find them, even if it means destroying all of you." The tension was building like a rope about to snap. Elizabeth, desperate, ran out into the mansion's garden. The cold New York wind bit her face, but the weight inside her was greater. She knew she was trapped between loyalty to her dead husband and fury for her living daughter. And somewhere, hidden beneath layers of lies, the secret fortune was waiting to explode. The main room was prepared for the reading of the will. Cameras outside, whispers inside. Elizabeth kept her hands clasped, as if she could hold time. Harper adjusted her glasses, opened the black folder and announced Richard's will would be read confidentially. It was the formal beginning of an inheritance war that had already been smoldering in silence. The truth seemed to grow in the darkness. Harper took a deep breath and began with protocol. Richard Cole, in his right mind, hereby determines. The words hung heavy as sharp gazes disputed their meaning. Sophia leaned forward, searching for hints of betrayal in every comma. Jonathan, behind her, calculated possibilities. No one there wanted justice. They wanted fortune, and they feared secrets. The truth seemed to grow in the darkness. The will seemed standard until Clause 9. Harper cleared her throat. There are instructions enclosed, to be carried out only if certain conditions are met. Elizabeth held her breath. Sophia tapped her pen on the table impatiently. The room contracted, as if the walls understood that a hidden fortune breathed between the lines of an impeccable document. The truth seemed to grow in the darkness. "Conditions?" Jonathan repeated, almost in a whisper. Harper nodded curtly. "A key and a letter must be presented together to release the special reserve. Without this, the assets will be divided as usual." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Sophia thought of the found key. The word secrets flew across the room like a black bird about to strike. Elizabeth looked up, trying to appear surprised. "Letter? What letter?" Her voice echoed too loudly. Harper didn't look away. A sealed letter described by Richard himself, containing truths that justify the secrecy. The widow felt the weight of the lie. The hidden fortune had a price, exposing confidences that could burn reputations and lead to betrayal. Sophia heard the crack in her mother's tone and smiled inwardly. If it exists, let's open it. What Richard thought he hid won't stay buried. Her father's name rang like a hammer. Harper closed the folder. The public reading ends here. The rest requires discretion and security. Outside, the press speculated. Inside, the conspiracy took shape. In the hallway, away from microphones, Harper approached Elizabeth. "Do you have anything that falls under that clause?" Her gaze wavered. "Only my grief." The lawyer didn't laugh. "Grief doesn't move the coffers, Mrs. Cole." The sentence cut like a blade. Secrets are taxes paid for power, and that fortune, made of numbers and guilt, demanded receipts. In the kitchen, where luxury seemed less arrogant, Sophia pulled out the cloth-wrapped key. The cool texture of the metal told a story without words. "If this unlocks what I think, I won't share anything," she told herself. Betrayal is a language she had mastered from an early age. To win the inheritance war, she had to bleed without staining her gloves. Jonathan waited for Harper in the side garden. "I can make your life easier. You tell me where the letter is. I'll stop the police from looking at old contracts." Harper studied his partner as if looking at a fake painting. "You're not stopping anything, Jonathan. You're delaying things at most." The executive's smile faded. "Fortune buys time, but it doesn't cover your tracks." That same afternoon, Elizabeth went down to her office and locked the door. She took the envelope from the bottom of the drawer. The red wax looked new, but the confession inside was covered in decades of moral dust. She pressed her ear against it, as if letters were whispering. Richard had written about clandestine donations, frontmen, politicians. The hidden fortune was a map to the abyss. The phone vibrated. Unknown number. "If you open this letter, your family will not survive the next day." The warning came silently, like a somber prayer. Elizabeth hung up, her hands cold. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face divided. Loyalty to her dead husband on one side, protection of the living on the other. On which side does truth sleep in peace? Sophia drove to an old warehouse on the outskirts of Brooklyn, where the company's maintenance office stored furniture and files. The key fitted into an iron cabinet. The metallic click sounded like a muffled gunshot. Inside was a small wooden box, engraved with the initials RC. "Father, your secrets have come home," she whispered. The box contained 3 items: a flash drive, an antique watch, and a deposit receipt from a Swiss bank. Nothing explained the letter. Sophia bit her lip. The flash drive required a password. The clock, stopped at 2:17, seemed like a clue. The receipt, a promise of treasure. "Fortune is a riddle," she repeated to herself. Each piece called for another piece. The war was gaining ground. Harper discreetly monitored Sophia's movements. He called a contact at the financial regulator. "I need a reading on the name Jonathan Miller and remittances from 12 years ago." On the other end, silence, then a whistle. "This stinks." Harper thanked him ungratefully. In worlds of luxury, truth is rare currency. Secrets, the exchange rate. Back at the mansion, the press had set up permanent camp. Drones circled the gardens. Talk shows exploited Elizabeth's every pause. Guilty widow or prisoner of an empire, they asked. The public wanted blood presented in crystal goblets. The news turned mourning into entertainment and conspiracy into prime-time soap operas. Elizabeth decided to seek out the priest who had officiated the Coles' wedding. In a discreet church on the Upper East Side, she confessed without naming names. "What if the truth destroys more than sin?" The priest calmly replied, "Hidden sins rule hearts, exposed truths free destinies." The phrase sounded too beautiful for someone who might lose their fortune. As she was leaving, a note was stuck to the car's wiper. "The letter isn't yours. Give it to Harper, or Sophia will know everything about Miami." Elizabeth froze. What was in Miami? A beachfront apartment purchased by Richard on behalf of a company. There, years ago, she had discovered the sweet smell of betrayal. The past demanded compound interest. Jonathan called an emergency meeting with executives. "We need to shield Fund X and transfer what we can to Nevada LLC structures." A director swallowed hard. "Without Richard, we've lost the shield." Jonathan smiled humorlessly. "So we'll create another one." When fortune is made of mirrors, any light reveals the dust of crime. Late that night, Sophia opened the flash drive with the help of a known hacker. The screen was black, and she was asked for a password. "Try Bell Tower 217, she said, remembering the stopped clock. The screen flashed and released folders, letters, donations, shells, coal estate inside, documents, audio recordings, and a photo of a safe behind a painting. Secrets don't like silence. The hacker pointed to a file called, "If this letter, it must be the text everyone wants." Upon opening, a manifesto appeared. Richard narrated how he amassed his empire, who sustained it, and who tried to overthrow it. Judges and politicians were named. At the end, an instruction. Without the original letter, nothing is worth anything. The hidden fortune required physical body and soul. Elizabeth called Harper and asked him to come to the mansion before dawn. "If I give you the letter, will you protect Sophia?" He replied with unprecedented frankness, "I will protect what the law allows me to. The rest, no one controls." She closed her eyes. Justice always comes late for those who live between marble staircases and glass steps. At 4 in the morning, while the city slept, someone cut the power in the gardens. Cameras went dark for seconds. A figure crossed the library and tried to force open the desk drawer. He couldn't find the letter. He found only Richard's portrait, slightly askew. Behind it, a discreet diamond-shaped mark, a map inside the frame. When the light came back on, Elizabeth was already in her office, sitting motionless. Harper entered through the side door, noticing the smell of leather and alcohol. "We've been visited," she said, pointing to the scratch on the lock. He examined the portrait. Richard would never trust just one safe. Secrets live in layers. Where there's one, there's always another waiting. Sophia arrived moments later, feigning surprise. "What happened?" Harper replied cautiously. "Someone tried to look for something they couldn't find." Sophia's eyes flashed briefly, revealing that she might have found it before. The inheritance war had changed temperature. Now every gesture was a thermometer of brittle loyalty. Harper requested privacy. He removed the painting from the wall and, with a blade, pressed the diamond mark. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside, a second wooden box, sealed. Elizabeth put her hand to her mouth. Sophia stepped forward, but the lawyer was quicker. If it's the letter, we'll open it with witnesses. Rules are armor. The three of them went down to the office, away from prying eyes and cameras. Harper placed the box on the desk, took a deep breath, and broke the seal with a box cutter. The smell of old paper wafted up, mingling with the furniture's varnish. Inside was an envelope and a card with impeccable handwriting. For when the truth can carry its own weight, the room held its breath. Elizabeth touched the envelope as if touching a memory. Sophia crossed her arms impatiently. "Open it." Harper looked up. "If we open it, the contents will become part of the inheritance process. That changes the game." The silence hurt. Fortune isn't just numbers, it's narrative. Whoever controls history decides who pays the price for betrayal. Jonathan, outside, received an anonymous message. They found it. His heart raced. He got into his car, ignoring traffic laws, and headed toward the mansion. Hanging from the rearview mirror, a small crucifix dangled. Prayers don't save financial statements. When moral capital evaporates, all that's left is to count the damage and the accomplices. Harper opened the envelope. A handwritten sheet of paper revealed itself in firm lines. Richard confessed to an agreement with Jonathan to manipulate results and inflate assets. Half of the profits were to go to an account in Geneva. There was also mention of a hush-hush payment to a senator. The letter was legal dynamite. Secrets now had a signature and a timestamp. Sophia smiled like someone watching a vault door open. "With this, I'll take over the company and clear our name." Elizabeth didn't smile. There's no such thing as cleansing dried mud. Harper saved digital copies and sealed them again. "We'll file for custody of this document." The hidden fortune was no longer a rumor and became evidence with specific weight. Day dawned, and as if the city knew, reporters swarmed. "Sources confirm the indictment," shouted an anchor. The mansion became a stage. Drones tore through the sky. Elizabeth, exhausted, realized the gilded prison had closed its locks. Luxury no longer had the texture of silk. It smelled of metal and fear. All wealth exacts a toll on the soul. Jonathan stormed onto the property before security could stop him. "This is a farce," he shouted, sweating. Harper, calm, showed only one paragraph. His name leaped from the lines. "You destroy me and sink everything with it," he threatened. "Maybe it's the only way to rebuild," Elizabeth replied. When betrayal breathes, the air becomes unbreathable. At that moment, sirens cut through the morning silence. One police car, then another. They weren't prisons. They were preservation warrants agents requested access to the servers and the vault. Sophia realized the move would require sacrifices. A war of inheritance is also a war of versions. Whoever speaks first shapes morale. Whoever remains silent pays with destiny. Harper advised, "Nobody erases anything. Those who destroy evidence choose handcuffs." Jonathan blushed. Elizabeth maintained her composure. Sophia took a deep breath. Outside, a reporter repeated, "The widow may have hidden more than tears." The episode's title was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Hidden wealth is a beacon that attracts and burns at the same time. As the agents collected devices, Harper pulled Elizabeth aside. "There's something the letter didn't mention. A reference to Miami, codename Blue Shore." Her eyes twitched. "That's mine." He shook his head. "That's the case." "Oh?" "The line between privacy and legal evidence disappears when secrets pay the luxury bill." Before handing over everything, Elizabeth made a calculated move. She picked up the watch, which had stopped at 2:17, and fastened it to her wrist. "Let me have that one." Harper hesitated and relented. Watches tell stories that don't get processed. As she adjusted the clasp, she felt the perfect click of fate. Time, at last, was taking its toll, and the truth, as always, came with fees. On the sidewalk, Jonathan faced the cameras. "I was betrayed by a dead man and used by those around him." The sentence instantly made headlines, but what seemed like a defense sounded like a confession. The hungry public had chosen a villain for breakfast. In games of chance and fall, the audience decides first. The court only writes the minutes later. When the doors finally closed, a tense silence remained. Elizabeth looked at Harper and Sophia. Did we find what we were looking for? No one answered, because in stories governed by secrets, discovery is never relief. It's the opening of another wound. The letter was out of the shadow, but the shadow was now larger than the entire house. The next few hours were consumed by phone calls, lawyers rushing about, and court notices banging on the mansion's door. The marble palace felt more like a trench than a home. Elizabeth paced the ballroom, the sound of her heels echoing like hammer blows in her head. Her fortune was threatened, and her secrets were ever closer to being exposed. Sophia watched with a mixture of anger and fascination. What was a burden to her mother was an opportunity for her. With this letter, I destroy Jonathan, control the empire, and clear the family name. Ambition vibrated in her voice. But Elizabeth knew that ambition is a double-edged sword. The brighter it shines, the deeper the cut it leaves. Jonathan, cornered, found refuge in a luxury Manhattan hotel. There, surrounded by champagne and soundproofed walls, he gathered his lawyers. If I fall, I'll take everyone with me. However, his speech sounded fragile even to himself. Richard's betrayal, as recorded in the letter, was only the first step. There was more, and Jonathan feared it was only the beginning of his downfall. Outside, the media was turning into a courtroom. Talk shows debated the future of the inheritance. Experts debated whether Elizabeth was an accomplice, whether Sophia was a victim or a villain, and whether Jonathan deserved prison. The public wanted blood, but served in crystal glasses. The inheritance war, once confined to the halls of the mansion, now raged on American screens. Harper began acting as the maestro of the crisis. He controlled the incoming information, organized documents, and discreetly protected himself. He understood that secrets are not destroyed, only negotiated. For every word he spoke to the press, he kept 3 words silent. After all, true power lies not in declared wealth, but in hidden wealth. The next morning, Elizabeth dreamed of Richard. He appeared in the study, sitting before the fireplace, repeating the same phrase, "Trust no one, not even our daughter." The dream woke her in tears. The weight of distrust gnawed at her soul. Even maternal love seemed tainted by conspiracy. In a war of inheritance, even blood ties were suspect. Sophia, on the other hand, slept little and schemed a lot. She discreetly gathered smaller shareholders of the company and promised to reveal Jonathan's compromising secrets in exchange for their support. Each promise was an invisible coin. On the chessboard she had inherited, she learned quickly, fortune is not maintained with affection, but with fragile alliances sustained by the threat of betrayal. Meanwhile, Jonathan made his desperate move. He hired private investigators to find evidence against Elizabeth. They combed through Miami records, joint accounts, and mysterious trips. They discovered the coastal apartment and old photographs of Elizabeth entering alone, always at night. Suspicion grew. Perhaps she knew much more than she was pretending. The discovery fell into the hands of the press. Headlines exploded. Richard Cole's widow had a secret life in Miami. Elizabeth was portrayed as a woman with 2 faces. To the public, she was no longer just a suffering widow, but an accomplice to a corrupt empire. Social judgment didn't need proof. A well-planted rumor was enough to turn into a verdict. At the height of tension, Harper received an anonymous call. A deep voice said, "The letter isn't unique. There's a second version kept in a safe at the Geneva bank. If this one comes to light, everyone falls together." The lawyer fell silent. Each secret seemed to spawn another, like endless Russian dolls. The hidden fortune was a maze with no clear exit. Elizabeth realized she could no longer back down. He gathered Harper and Sophia together in his study one silent night. He placed the letter on the table between them. "Decide with me. Either we reveal everything and destroy Richard, or we hide and become prisoners." Sophia, her eyes cold, replied, "I'd rather be a prisoner of gold than truly poor." Silence sealed the dilemma. The mansion became a stage for silent warfare. Every hallway seemed to carry echoes of interrupted conversations. Every closed door held unspoken secrets. Elizabeth, exhausted, began to realize she had no allies left. Grief had turned to paranoia, and the hidden fortune had become a curse that weighed on her shoulders like an invisible chain. Jonathan, determined not to die alone, called a press conference at a luxury hotel. In front of cameras and journalists, he openly accused the Cole family of manipulation and fraud. Richard was no hero. He was the architect of Wall Street's greatest betrayal. The words echoed like gunshots. The press cheered. The public found a new villain, but the arrows hit everyone. Sophia watched the press conference on television and smiled bitterly. He dug his own grave. She immediately called Harper. "Now it's our turn to strike. If the letter is released to the public, Jonathan won't survive a day." Harper, more cautious, warned, "And neither will you. When secrets become headlines, fortune dissolves into gold dust." That same night, Elizabeth was forced to appear at a Manhattan charity event, surrounded by judgmental gazes. Dressed in elegant black, she walked under blinding flashbulbs. Journalists shouted, "Ms. Cole, what did you know about Miami? And about the letter?" Each question was an invisible spear. The lavish dinner turned into a live-streamed social trial. As the guests toasted, Harper circulated discreetly, negotiating favors and probing intentions. He knew that fortunes were decided between crystal glasses and forced smiles. At the back of the room, Sophia whispered to shareholders, promising stability in exchange for loyalty. She was the epitome of betrayal, but in the world of inheritance, loyalty is always a luxury. Jonathan was also in the room, escorted by lawyers. He approached the Coles table cynically. "Would you like to toast Richard's memory, or the empire he built on quicksand?" Silence froze the air. Elizabeth looked up and replied, "Richard may have erred, but his fortune supported many who now spit in the dish." The public confrontation was beginning. Suddenly, a waiter dropped a tray. The metallic clang echoed like a gunshot. The cameras spun, and for a few seconds the room was plunged into chaos. Sophia seized the moment to pull Jonathan by the arm and whisper, "I have proof you knew more than you're admitting. If I fall, you fall with me." Jonathan smiled wanly. "Then we die together." The tension reached a climax when a guest, a respected senator, approached Elizabeth and spoke softly. "You don't understand, Mrs. Cole. This letter doesn't just belong to your family. It's political dynamite." Her heart raced. Now she understood. The hidden fortune wasn't just an inheritance, but a ticking time bomb capable of toppling pillars of power in Washington. As they left the event, flashbulbs caught Elizabeth getting into her limousine. But inside the car, there was no relief, only piercing silence. Sophia and Harper accompanied her, each immersed in their own calculations. The city shone through the windows, but the glow seemed to mock. The Cole Empire was a gilded prison on wheels, speeding toward the unknown. At the same moment, a hacker released part of the flash drive's files online, bank statements, contracts, and the names of politicians. The news exploded in seconds. The Cole Empire had gone from a family secret to a national scandal. The climax was upon them. The truth was no longer a choice. It was a sentence, and no one would escape unscathed. The Cole Mansion's ballroom was prepared for a lavish dinner, honoring Richard's memory, but everyone knew it was a social trap. Crystal chandeliers reflected in champagne flutes, while musicians played in the background. However, the atmosphere was tense. The hidden fortune had already become public knowledge, and every guest wanted to see blood, not just luxury. Elizabeth, dressed in black silk, walked through the hall like a tragic queen. Her presence drew looks of pity and distrust. Reporters outside waited for a sentence to spark headlines. Harper stood beside her, whispering strategies. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed predatory. Her gaze scanned alliances, ready to plunge the knife of betrayal into her at the precise moment. Jonathan entered last, escorted by lawyers and advisors. Silence fell over the room, as if the villain of a play had just taken the stage. He raised his glass and smiled. "Let's toast the truth." The gesture provoked a deafening murmur. Elizabeth stood her ground, but the flame of hatred in her eyes betrayed. There was no mourning here, but a war of inheritance. At the height of the evening, Harper announced he would make a statement. He opened the black folder and took out Richard's letter. The room stopped. This document confirms the existence of secret accounts, political alliances, and illegal transfers. But it also confirms something else, the betrayal of those who swore to be allies. Everyone looked at Jonathan. The partner paled, cornered by the hidden fortune. Jonathan reacted desperately. "This is manipulation. Richard wasn't a saint, but he wasn't the only one either. You all knew it." The cry echoed through the hall. The cameras, discreetly present, captured every word. The scandal became a spectacle. The party he was supposed to celebrate became a courtroom. Elizabeth then raised her voice. "Richard left me secrets to protect, but the truth always finds light." Suddenly, the doors burst open. Federal agents entered, ordering everyone to remain in place. Guests screamed. Reporters tried to push forward. Elizabeth closed her eyes. The climax had arrived. The mansion, a symbol of wealth, was transformed into a gilded prison. Sophia clenched her fists, understanding that even with Jonathan's victory, the family's downfall was already underway. Outside, the lights of the press made the place look like a battlefield. Headlines appeared in real time. The Cole letter revealed, betrayal on Wall Street, hidden fortune becomes national scandal. Inside, the characters no longer owned the narrative. They were now its prisoners. Each secret exposed was a stone torn from the empire. Jonathan tried to escape through the back door, but was intercepted by officers. The scene, captured on camera, went viral within minutes. Sophia watched with a cold smile. "He's down." But Harper warned, "When one partner falls, he takes the others with him. Prepare yourself." The young woman realized too late her victory was a mirage. The betrayal she had cultivated was coming back double. Elizabeth, at the center of it all, faced the cameras when approached by reporters. "What did Richard really leave you?" The widow took a deep breath and replied, "More than a fortune. He left a lesson. Secrets destroy, betrayals kill, and truths always exact their price." The phrase echoed like an epitaph for the Cole Empire. Morality emerged amidst the chaos. At that moment, the lights in the mansion briefly dimmed. When they returned, the safe behind the golden portrait was open, empty. Only torn papers and dust remained. The last symbol of the hidden fortune had vanished. The narrative loop closed. What had opened the story now closed its tragedy. The wealth hadn't just disappeared, it had silently evaporated. The first hours after dinner were consumed by sirens and headlines. The mansion was surrounded. Helicopters circled the New York sky, and reporters broadcast every movement live. Elizabeth, in grief and despair, walked among agents gathering evidence. Richard's funeral, planned to be discreet, became a public spectacle amid the chaos of the revealed fortune. At Marble Hill Cemetery, hundreds of cameras competed for space with wreaths of flowers. Elizabeth walked slowly, supported by Harper, but each step seemed to sink her into quicksand. Around her, whispers of betrayal and secrets echoed like a cold wind. Sophia kept her gaze fixed, haughty, but inside she burned with rage. The inheritance war wasn't over. As the tombstone was sealed, journalists shouted questions. Mrs. Cole, was the letter real? Was Jonathan an accomplice? Elizabeth didn't answer, but each silence felt like a confession. The public didn't accept mourning without scandal. The truth now belonged in the headlines, not on the gilded walls of the mansion. The hidden fortune had become a corpse exposed to society. Jonathan, handcuffed, was taken for federal questioning. His image in front of the cameras, sweaty and haggard, instantly went viral. He screamed that he was a victim, but no one believed him. Betrayal doesn't inspire compassion. As he was shoved into the police car, crowds chanted, "Thief!" The public downfall of a millionaire fueled the collective hunger for justice. Elizabeth returned to the mansion, now transformed into an investigation site. Federal seals covered the doors of safes and archives. Halls once lit by parties were now filled with boxes of documents. The luxury had lost its luster. The silence was suffocating. The widow, alone in her room, stared at Richard's portrait. For the first time, she didn't cry. She simply murmured, "The empire is over." The Cole mansion, once the site of millionaire parties and gatherings, now seemed like a mausoleum of broken memories. Elizabeth walked through the empty hallways, each gilded painting returning Richard's cold gaze. The silence was so heavy that she heard her own heart pounding like a hammer. Luxury had become a gilded prison, suffocating her with memories and secrets. The nights became unbearable. Elizabeth would wake to the sound of imaginary footsteps, believing she saw figures in the mirrors. With each creak of the wood, he felt the hidden fortune still taking its toll. Her medications piled up on her bedside table, but no pill cured the paranoia of carrying the most poisonous inheritance, the betrayal that now isolated her from the world. Sophia rarely appeared. Her daughter, once an ally, was now a sworn rival. In their rare encounters, their dialogue was cold and calculated. "The letter is my weapon," Sophia would say. "The letter is our curse," Elizabeth would retort. The gulf between mother and daughter widened with every word. The inheritance war had become a psychological battle, with no victors, only survivors. The mansion's walls held more than memories. Harper, on a brief visit, warned, "The investigation isn't over. They'll be back." Elizabeth just laughed, a bitter laugh. "They can take papers, safes, even my peace, but they won't take my guilt." He watched her silently, realizing that the gilded prison didn't need bars. It was built in her mind. One rainy dawn, Elizabeth opened the safe again. Inside, there was no longer the letter, no receipts, only the clock stopped at 2:17. She held it to her chest and murmured, "You win, Richard." The motionless hand seemed to mock her sanity. In that moment, she understood that no fortune could buy back time, no secrets could erase the weight of truth. The rain battered the mansion's stained-glass windows as Elizabeth, exhausted, walked to the study. The same safe that had triggered the tragedy was still there, empty except for the stopped clock. Touching it, images came flooding back. The will, the letter, Richard's secrets. The beginning and the end connected. The hidden fortune had been revealed only to destroy. Outside, reporters waited for the widow to leave, but she never appeared. Elizabeth locked the doors and drew the curtains. For the first time, he accepted that his life was no longer public, but neither was it free. The gilded prison had become absolute. The luxury that had once impressed him was now the cell where the echo of betrayal would haunt her until the end. Sophia left the mansion that morning, vowing never to return. She took with her only her intact ambition and a look burning with hatred. Elizabeth watched through the window as her daughter's car disappeared into the fog. She understood that the inheritance war hadn't ended there. It had merely changed its stage. The next battle would be a cold one, made of lawsuits, headlines, and memories. Jonathan, imprisoned and humiliated, was paraded across every screen as an example of his downfall. Harper, discreet, ensured his political survival by handing over additional documents to the authorities. Each followed their own path, but all bore the same scar. Richard Cole's truth had freed no one, only chained the living to the shadow of his corrupt fortune. Elizabeth, alone in her study, lit the fireplace. She placed the clock on the table, staring at the motionless hand at 2:17. Silent tears flowed. The same object that had opened the cycle now sealed its end. The opening scene closed in a perfect loop. The letter had disappeared, but its curse remained. The hidden fortune left no victors, only ruins. The Cole story showed the world that fortune without truth is just poison wrapped in gold. Secrets may sustain empires, but sooner or later they crumble upon those who protect them. Betrayal doesn't choose victims, it only turns allies into executioners. In the end, no one inherits peace, only the silent debt of ill-gotten power. Elizabeth discovered that no amount of wealth can silence one's conscience. Sophia learned that boundless ambition consumes one's own blood. Jonathan proved that disloyalty is not a weapon of defense, but a sentence of ruin. And Harper, the eternal calculator, realized that even lawyers cannot escape the weight of hidden truths. Everyone lost more than they gained. The Cole mansion remains in New York, but now it's a shadow of its former glory. Visited by curious onlookers, it's remembered as a symbol of the downfall of a family that hid fortune and betrayal behind gilded doors. The empire dissolved into news dust, but its moral remains. Luxury without honesty is a prison that suffocates even heirs. Perhaps, upon hearing this story, you wonder, what if it were me? How far would you go to protect a legacy? What would you hide to avoid losing your wealth? Outsiders think it's easy, but inside the mansion, amidst secrets and inheritance wars, every decision is a double-edged sword, and every choice made in the dark exacts a high interest rate in the light. If this story has captivated you thus far, remember, other hidden fortunes await revelation. Subscribe, share, and come back to hear more secrets the world tries to keep quiet. Because in the end, these aren't just stories of millionaires, they're reflections of how greed can turn any empire to dust. And the truth always comes out.